David, I started the recording, but I don't see that we're live, so I just want to make sure. Here we go. This is what normally happens. I just have to threaten the, the computer and the recording starts. So here we are. A few people coming in still, but just in honor of everyone's time, I'd just like to get started now. And just welcome you to this Wednesday night class on Buddhist mindfulness, and just decided to offer or dedicate rather these next 10 weeks to awakening joy from a Buddhist perspective. And well, first of all, can you hear me okay? Again, the meditation hall. And then at home, if you can't hear me, welcome everyone. Just want to make sure that everyone can hear me, so if you can, please write in the chat and let me know. So it's good to see everyone and feel everyone, even if I can't see you in person. So just wanted to dedicate these next 10 weeks to cultivating joy from a Buddhist perspective. And I would like to honor my long-term teacher, James Barris. He's a very senior Buddhist Western teacher, American teacher in the Theravada tradition of Buddhism, and he's actually taught in the US and internationally for I think about 45 years now. And so he wrote a book on awakening joy about, 20 years ago or so, and has taught a course in awakening joy for that many years every year. He teaches it more from a secular perspective to a wider audience, but since this is a Buddhist temple, I really wanted to offer it from the perspective of Buddhism and go much more deeper into the practice from a Buddhist perspective. But I didn't want to fail to honor that a lot of these teachings that I'm offering over the next 10 weeks are, from James, from the course that James put together. And also wanted to point out that you don't obviously have to show up for all the classes. If you can, that's wonderful, and we can maybe build a true community together. But if this is the only class that you can attend, I hope you still benefit. And so don't feel shy if you know, oh gosh, I can't attend, the next couple of weeks. Come back anytime. And I'm just making these classes so that each one is complete in its own way. And normally I offer the class by giving a talk first on the theme for the evening, and then we'll just go into a guided meditation leading into silence. So just to give you a little bit of a sense if you've never been here before. So welcome everyone. And so I'd really like to begin first of all by pointing out the importance of joy in Buddhist practice. It's actually one of 7 factors that, when cultivated, lead to enlightenment. The Buddha's path that culminated in full enlightenment, full awakening, awakening to the truth of suffering and the end of suffering that he discovered for himself. And then joy is also one of 4 Brahma Viharas. And Brahma Vihara, the 4 Brahma Viharas are actually these heart qualities that we can all cultivate in meditation practice. They're often also referred to as the supreme emotions that we can experience in our heart. So just to briefly mention them, they are the qualities of loving kindness, of compassion, of joy, and of equanimity. And so joy is this expression of the heart that is able to rejoice and to delight, and also is capable of having an experience of deep happiness and contentment in the heart and mind. And to me, one of the most important insights that the Buddha, to be, so to speak, before his enlightenment had, was that the joy that arises in meditation is not to be feared. We don't have to think on the 4 Noble Truths, and they all culminate in the end of suffering. But the 4 Noble Truths, I just want to briefly mention them here, are the truth of suffering, that suffering exists in this worldly realm, on earth, and then also that there are causes of suffering, like craving and desire and aversion, ignorance and hatred, so to speak. And then also that the end of suffering is possible and that there is a path that the Buddha outlined that leads to the end of suffering. And Buddha was famously known to often say or tell his students or disciples that I teach one thing only, that there's suffering and a path to the end of suffering. And to me, the most important message of Buddhism really is that the end of suffering is possible, that it's not just that, suffering exists, that by cultivating these Four Noble Truths in our meditation and daily life, that it can lead to the end of suffering and full awakening in our hearts and minds. And so, like I said, this path that leads to the end of suffering is this Noble Eightfold Path. And while we're not able to get into the whole path as part of this joy course, I just want to say that joy is an aspect of this path, because one of the path factors that lead to enlightenment is called right effort in Buddhism. And so right effort includes abandoning unwholesome states of mind or unwholesome emotions like greed, hatred, and aversion, and to cultivate wholesome states of mind like joy and happiness, peace and contentment. And the Buddha was often, by many people, referred as the happy one, that even though he taught that life is full of suffering, he had clearly overcome suffering, and he didn't come across as grim or depressed or anxious in any way. I think it's quite the contrary, that a lot of the depictions of the Buddha is someone that's just radiating love and joy in his presence. And there's a story in the Buddhist scriptures and the teachings that were outlined, the words of the Buddha that were spoken in his lifetime, where shortly after his enlightenment, a man encountered the Buddha coming towards him on a forest path. And he was just taken aback by this radiance that the Buddha was manifesting, and he was really just pausing and just taking in, wow, who is this being that's coming towards me? So when the Buddha approached him, he actually stopped the Buddha and he asked him, "May I ask you, are you a god?" And the Buddha said, "No." And the man said, "Well, are you a man?" And the Buddha said, "No." and then he said, "Well, what are you?" And he said, "I'm awake." And basically what he just meant by that is that he had discovered these Four Noble Truths that lead to the end of suffering, and that he had fully overcome and transformed suffering and come into a real state of lasting joy and happiness, and really being in acceptance with everything that arises in this human realm. And he was at peace with it. He had come to peace with it. And a popular Buddhist monastic that I have actually been following and reading a lot in recent time, he's a fellow German. I'm originally born and raised in Germany, and I really love this monastic. He's a scholar and teacher of Buddhism, and he has been of great service by translating so many of the scriptures of Buddhism, not just into Pali and from Pali and Sanskrit, but from the Chinese as well. So he obviously is very gifted in terms of language, and his name is Bhikkhu Bodhi. Sorry, not Bhikkhu Bodhi, Bhikkhu Analayo. Bhikkhu Bodhi is another famous scholar and translator, but Bhikkhu Analayo. And he describes the Buddhist path as, quote, an ever-increasing refinement of joy. So that's really something to take in, because a lot of us think, oh, Buddhism is about suffering. And so the difference in saying an ever-increasing refinement of joy, that's what he discovered in the Buddha's teaching. So I think that's very important for all of us to take in. So inclining the mind towards joy and well-being gives us the strength to find a path to really endure these very challenging times that we're living through. when we're witnessing so many conflicts in the world, so much war, so much violence, so much injustice and hardships. And I'm sure that if I asked for a raise of hands and asked you, has life become more stressful and challenging for you all in recent times, I think that probably a lot of us, including myself, would raise their hands. So it feels really important in times like these to balance feelings of hopelessness, grief and despair that can easily come up for us in these challenging times with feelings of joy, gratitude, and well-being. And this is really what we'll be cultivating together in this course over the next 10 weeks. One of the easiest way, and there's going to be a whole class on that, but one of the easiest ways to cultivate joy in one's heart is through the practice of gratitude. So I just wanted to offer us just sort of a mini exercise for a moment. So if your eyes are not already closed, maybe just inviting you to close your eyes or lower your gaze. This is just going to be a very short exercise. And just bring your awareness into your heart and mind, feeling your body sitting here, feeling your breath in the body. And just taking a moment now to bring to mind someone or something that you are grateful for. It can be a person, an animal, maybe even a place, a circumstance. And when you have connected with that person or animal or thing, maybe it's something in nature, a tree, whatever it is, silently say to yourself, thank you. And for a moment, allow yourself to really feel this body, this gratitude inside your body. Allow this experience of gratitude to deepen inside your being. Just notice what it feels like. And if it feels right to you to have your eyes remain closed for the rest of the talk, that's perfectly fine. It's always good to listen to the body. And you can certainly open them again if you wish. But so just wanted to give this little mini exercise and say that when we have doubt about our right to experience joy in the midst of what can kind of feel like a tsunami of suffering, it really helps to know that joy has actually been a tool of survival for so many people who have lived through the darkest of times. And the people that always come up to me that I've really taken to be my teachers, one of them is still alive but another isn't, are the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And so the Dalai Lama, who I'm sure all of you know, was forced into exile and saw his country, Tibet, devastated by hostile forces many, many years ago. And then also his dear friend Desmond Tutu, both of them really having lived through the darkest of times. Desmond Tutu living through the darkest of years of apartheid in South Africa. Both of them in later years developed a very deep and beautiful friendship, and they actually wrote a book together that they titled The Book of Joy. And they made a documentary several years ago, and I'm sure you can Google it. Well, I know you can because I've watched it, but there's a documentary about the two of them getting together, I think maybe 3 times over the course of several years. And when you see them together, they are not just playful together, they're happy, they're joyful. And I feel so much that they're such a beautiful example of how when one experiences such deep darkness and despair, it can lead to the greatest joy in one's being, to really come to that place of true happiness through the experience of suffering, through one's spiritual path. And I've quoted this often, but I love this expression in Taoism, one of the Chinese spiritual tradition. There's a teaching, a saying that there are 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows of life, and that they both exist in equal measure in our lives. So maybe the times that we experience a lot of darkness and sorrow, we can remember, but there's also contentment and joy and happiness. Maybe it's not present right now, but it will be there at some point. So if we focus only on the sorrows in our lives, we're then not being able to see the whole picture. So it's really important to, along with the sorrows, to also open to the joys of life, to contentment, to happiness, and to cultivate that in our hearts. So the beauty and goodness around us that is also there is really important to take into our hearts and cultivate that. And to remember that if we can view our suffering from a wider perspective, then it can also open us more easily into experiences of contentment, joy, and happiness. And learning to deal with the sorrows of life in a wise way is also going to be a very important part of this course and this training. So all is to say, you don't need to consider yourself a joyful person. It's just about cultivating these wholesome states of mind in our hearts and minds so that we can experience more moments of contentment and peace in our hearts. And I think it's also important to say that people that tend to be on the happy side, they're not happy all the time. They experience joys and hardships in their lives as well, just like everyone else, and difficult emotions such as grief and sorrow. But they're also very much in touch with positive experiences. They're really experiencing and taking in the good that's coming into their life. They have a deep sense of gratitude, what's going well. And anytime that there's a moment of goodness and something happening that's positive, their feelers really go out for that, and they're able to take that into their heart, just as they might be aware of an experience of sorrow, grief, and despair. In 2004, the American historian and playwright, I'm sure some of you might have heard of him, he is Howard Zinn, and he wrote the famous book, A People's History of the United States. And he also published a very inspiring article in The Nation magazine several years ago that he titled The Optimism of Uncertainty. And so in this article, he said that an optimist isn't necessarily a blithe, slightly sappy whistler in the dark of our time. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us energy to act and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of the world in a different direction. So this evening, as part of our first class, I would just like to introduce the 3 principles of awakening joy, of cultivating joy in our hearts and minds. And so the first one of that is developing and increasing wholesome states of minds or emotions. So as we all know, there's a lot of different mind states and emotions that we experience in this human form, in this human body. Just naming a few like joy, sorrow, happiness, sadness, contentment, anger, fear, excitement. boredom, grief, enthusiasm. I think we've all experienced them, and many, many more. And some of them are pleasant, and when we allow ourselves to feel them more fully at a deep level, they can lead to a true sense of well-being inside of our hearts and minds. And then the other emotions or mind states that are more felt as unpleasant, when we dwell on those, they can lead to a deep-seated sense of dis-ease and dissatisfaction in us, or dukkha, as the Buddha would have called it. So it's interesting, it's basically the same, the different side of the same coin. When we cultivate the positive emotions, they lead to beautiful states and feelings in our hearts and minds. And then if we really just dwell on the sorrows and what's, terrible, or what we perceive as terrible, it's really going to take us down into a dark space, maybe even depression and despair. So if we want to experience deeper experiences of well-being and happiness, we can then cultivate, maintain, and increase wholesome states of mind. And we can also work in a skillful way with the challenging states of mind that we experience, so that they don't tend to overwhelm us. And these are all very direct teachings that the Buddha outlined for us that I'm going to be talking about in these next several weeks. And so the second principle of awakening joy is noticing the feeling of gladness that accompanies the wholesome states of minds when they have arisen in us. So noticing feelings of gladness. And so reflecting that reflecting that you're being generous, and noticing how good it feels inside to commit, so to speak, an act of kindness or of generosity in the world, and really take that in and allow this experience of gladness in the heart to arise that accompanies this positive state, this wholesome state of generosity, for example. And the more we notice it, the more it then can become alive inside of us. When we pay attention to this sense of well-being inside of us, we can then really deepen the experience of that in our hearts and minds. It's kind of like marinating in it. And I just want to give one little example of how neuroscience has also really in recent years discovered what the Buddha already knew 2,600 years ago. But in neuroscience, this is referred to as sculpting the neural pathways by being on the lookout for the good, and then really letting it land and staying with that feeling inside, and just really taking it in at a deep level, just like we did in that mini exercise of really taking in this sense of gratitude that we experienced. And then the third principle of awakening joy is inclining the mind towards joy and well-being. So over time, if we look for the good, it then becomes a habit of our mind to naturally incline our minds towards joy. And maybe most of you or some of you have heard of this expression, the confirmation bias. And it's basically that the more we look for the good in people, or we look for the good in situations that we encounter, the more we will then find it in our lives. And then on the other hand, if we've made it a habit to only look for what's going wrong or how we're feeling terrible, the more we are on the lookout for that, the more we will find that in our lives. And this is referred to as the negativity bias. So really what I'm trying to practice for all of us together is really, I don't think there's a term, but to develop a positivity bias where we're on the lookout for the good in other people and on the lookout for what's good in the world, and balance out, what we so often encounter on the news, for example, which is just wars and violence and despair, and just really being on the lookout. And I'm sure you'll find that there's just as many situations and experiences of goodness in people and acts of generosity when we begin to really look for them in our lives. We're inviting them into our lives. And I can almost guarantee you that you'll find more of that when you are on the lookout for those experiences of goodness. And so lastly, I just wanted to say this evening that awakening joy is really based on the Buddha's teachings that our suffering or well-being is not determined by what's happening in our lives, but rather by how we are relating to it. So are we relating with anger, fear, and frustration to whatever is present in the moment? An attitude of why is this happening to me? Or can we invite kindness and compassion and cultivate a calm and peaceful heart, even in the midst of hardship? And to me, one of the most striking examples of how to maintain a peaceful and joyful heart in the midst of terror and violence were really the leaders of the civil rights movement in our country, who were able to keep their hearts free from hatred and cultivate love even towards white racists, reminding themselves that racism stems from a place of ignorance. And in Buddhism, this is called an expression of metta, of unconditional love in our hearts and minds that we can cultivate. So in the spirit of that, I would like to guide you through a meditation of cultivating unconditional love, or loving kindness, as it's called. And I will be choosing meditations for these classes in these upcoming weeks that directly can give us a sense of how to cultivate these states of peace and calm and joy and happiness, contentment, whatever you want to call them or relate to them, how they really are cultivated from the inside out. That it's not something that we need to look for even on the outside, that we can cultivate it from within. If it exists on the outside, beautiful, but the Buddha taught that this is all accessible within our own hearts and minds. So with that said, I'm just going to ring the bell and then just invite you into a space of meditation. And this is a meditation on metta, or loving kindness, inspired by a Buddhist nun that I really very much feel very grateful for. And she no longer is with us, but she was Ayya Khema, taught for many years internationally. In her later years as a German Jew, returning to Germany after having left at age 15, when Nazi Germany came into power and her family had to flee. She was able to return to her native country in later years and teach Buddhism, which was very meaningful to her. So this is dedicated to her beautiful spirit. So just perhaps beginning by feeling your body seated here on your cushion or chair. And allowing yourself to sit in a wear that offers a sense of presence in the heart and mind, and also inviting you into a place of relaxation. Noticing the breath flowing through you, flowing through the body, the in-breath and the out-breath. And just feeling connected to this life force, this life breath, with a sense of gratitude in your heart and mind that you're alive in this moment. And as you bring your attention into your heart center, imagine for a moment that you're breathing in and out of the heart. And then also imagining that you have a beautiful bubbling fountain of clear and pure water in your heart, where every drop that falls down is filled with love, so that your heart becomes filled with love very quickly, and all the drops that come out of that wonderful fountain, a fountain of love, have shiny colors in them, because they're so pure and so clear that a rainbow can be mirrored in them. And with that beauty, the warmth of love is also coming into your heart and filling it completely. And since your heart is already full of all these drops of love, you now fill the whole body from head to toe with those beautiful clear water drops from the fountain of love. And now let this fountain of love reach out to the person nearest you. You might not remember what they look like, but just sensing their energies. Fill their heart with those drops that contain the warmth of love, a pure and clear love that fills that person's heart, so that there's joy and recognition of the beauty of love. And now think of your parents or other people who were your primary caretakers, whether they're still alive or not. That fountain of bubbly love is available to everyone. And so let all the drops that you can gather reach out and fill their hearts. The love that they feel brings joy to them. And now let that fountain of love in your heart send its water drops, each one full of love, to the hearts of the people you live with, or those that are nearest and dearest to you, without any expectation to get anything in return, as a pure gift from your heart to their hearts. And the more drops you give away, the better that fountain seems to function. It reaches higher and wider, and more water drops full of love seem to come out of it. Now you reach out to the heart of your friends, your relatives, your acquaintances, and fill all of them with the beauty of that clear and pure water that comes out of the fountain of love. And you can see that they feel joy in your togetherness, in your care, in your gift. And from there you look around for more people that can take part in the fountain of love that is bubbling in your heart and that you can give the gift of love to. Those that you meet in your everyday life, those that you maybe see around here, those that you've heard about, those that you have known, those that you assume are there. That fountain of love is infinite. It has no limitations. The drops full of love can go far and wide. And from this overflowing fountain of love, you can even think of some difficult people, either difficult in your own life or difficult because their actions seem to be harmful. But the fountain of love, being infinite, goes everywhere. And so you fill their hearts too, with that clear and pure water. And each drop brings the warmth of love to their hearts. And that is really the only way to overcome hate and dislike. And so we look at that fountain of love in our hearts and let it rise higher and higher, get bigger and bigger, so that it can reach out to more and more people in our lives and everywhere. It goes far beyond the limitations of our bodies and our minds, reaching out everywhere to fill people's hearts with these drops of love, which accumulate so that their whole hearts feel nourished. And we can let the drops of that fountain of love reach out and nourish all the animals that we can think of. Birds, insects, bees, cats, dogs, cows, raccoons, any animal really you can think of. Deer, the fish in the streams of the ocean. A fountain of love from your heart, unlimited. And it can go anywhere and nourish everything it touches with purity, with love, with clarity. And so we let it also drop, each water drop, on nature, on this earth, on everything around us. And nourishment of that water drop is the greatest that we can bestow on everyone. So let that fountain of love in your heart grow so large that you can actually feel that it lets drops of love reach out to the whole of this planet. All of the living beings, all of nature, the earth, the water, the sky, everything that belongs to this planet. A fountain of love in your heart that is unlimited, and it can become so large that it can go anywhere. Just inviting all of us to dwell in this heart space of ours filled with love, and just let it flow through you and reach far and wide wherever you wish to direct it for the next 10 minutes or so as we come into the silent part of our meditation. And as the meditation is nearing the end, you now place the attention back on yourself. And as you feel the purity and the warmth of love from that fountain in your heart, you are filled with that from head to toe, surrounded by it. And the joy that it gives is the most important aspect of your whole inner life that you're now experiencing. So may all people everywhere find the fountain of love in their hearts. Thank you so much for your practice this evening. This is sort of the last 10 minutes that we normally have together that is reserved for questions or comments. And I already see that my friend Erica, whom I have practiced with in Sangha for many, many years, has joined us online, and she usually has a really good question. So in honor of our friendship, I'm going to have her question go first. I think she posted it a while back. So Erica says, how do we look and see the good in people without being hurt by their poor treatment? So from a Buddhist perspective, when somebody is behaving poorly or maybe even being harmful towards another being, it's really important that that comes from a place of dukkha, from a place of suffering. And the most important response in Buddhism to suffering is always that of compassion. So we recognize in that moment that that person is suffering and try to meet it with kindness, with love and compassion as best as we can. And it's also really important to recognize that seed of the potential to harm others in ourselves. I always remember that beautiful teaching or story about the Native American elder and his grandson. And he tells his grandson that there's a war going on inside of us, and it's that between the good wolf and the bad wolf. And so the grandson becomes really curious, and he asks his grandfather, well, Grandpa, who wins the war? And he says, well, whatever aspect of yourself you feed, the good or the bad. So it's really important to know that we all carry the seeds of love and of hatred within ourselves, and that if a person is harmful towards another, it just simply means that they're overcome by suffering, or their condition has led them to act in those ways or speak in those ways. It doesn't mean that we need to condone it, obviously, but it just means that we can meet it with compassion. As the Buddha always said, hatred does not cease by hatred, but by love alone is healed. And I think that's really important to remember when we find people who are committing harmful actions in the world. So I don't know if that answers your question, Erica, but I did my best to do so. So any question, first of all, in the temple, and then there's another question online, but I want to give everyone here also a chance, obviously, to ask questions, and we can take time. So it's fine, we have time. Going once, going maybe later. Will also come up after if they're too shy to ask questions. I'll be around, but let me see. I think there's another question here online. Somebody, or maybe a comment, somebody saying, I'm having difficulty feeling the sensations of love in my heart. I'm hoping with this practice, this may help. Mm-hmm. I think that we can, those of us who have practiced loving kindness or metta over time, we can all attest to that it can. But it's also really important to know that the practice of loving kindness or cultivating unconditional love can often bring out the opposite. That's why loving kindness practice is often considered a purification practice. So not to get discouraged, we might be even saying phrases of loving kindness. There's so many ways of practicing it, maybe wishing ourselves to be well and happy and peaceful, and then we're really confused because instead there's all these experiences and feelings of maybe self-judgment and hatred, and those are all based in our own conditioning from caregivers, society, culture, whatever it is, the messages that we've been given. And so those get purified when we cultivate loving kindness in our hearts. And ultimately, it will bring out this natural sense of contentment and joy that you can tap into. But oftentimes, the ugly stuff has to first be sort of purged out. And so please don't get discouraged if you're trying to send yourself love or send others love, if there's sometimes other emotions that also can show up with the practice of love. So, So there's the Buddha talked about the two enemies to love, to loving kindness practice, and the near enemy he called attachment, that sort of masquerades as love, but it's really an attachment and just wanting this person to make us happy, which is not an unconditional love or an all-giving love. And then the far enemy obviously is hatred. So both can show up in our experiences with love. And it's just, the ultimate experience of love that we can have as a human being is unconditional love. But it doesn't mean that we're always connected to it. It's just something that we practice over time to hopefully bring out, to create less suffering in the world and bring more peace and joy into the world from our hearts to other people's hearts or animals' hearts or plants' hearts. So, Yes?
So tonight we have used loving kindness and unconditional love pretty synonymously. Is that correct? Is that a way of thinking of loving kindness rather than saying that phrase? Does that equate to unconditional love, would you say?
Yeah, loving kindness practice, it's the same, it's synonymously, and so loving kindness is just a way to spread, to be normally when you use phrases, which there's a way of using phrases of loving kindness, the traditional, you start with yourself, and then you're spreading it out from there to more and more beings. First you're, maybe a benefactor, someone that's benefited you, then a neutral person, a friend, a neutral person, and then even a difficult person, and then from there to more and more and more beings like we practice in this world. So it's really an expression of unconditional love, and as Ayya Khema says, the teacher, that really this meditation that I offered tonight is in spirit of, she really has a very strong sense of unconditional love, in that she says that love is really not something that we reserve for one or two or three people. It's really a quality that exists in our hearts. So it's not something dependent on a person or two people or three people, but it's a quality that we cultivate in the heart that can spread far and wide. It's not dependent on one person. So, and that's, what we really mean in Buddhism by unconditional love or loving kindness, to really know it's a quality of the heart that can spread far and wide. It's not just reserved to a person or to two or three people that you feel close to. So does that answer your question? somewhat?
Yeah, kind of.
I thought I saw something in your face. Yeah.
Just more that's a different, unconditional love is just, that's a term I'm more familiar with than loving kindness. And so if those things are really synonymous with each other, that helps me better understand the concept of loving kindness.
And I just recently, because of listening to a lot of talks by Ayakema, she uses this word. She prefers to say unconditional love versus loving kindness. And it's really helped me to see, it's not a love that depends on this person treating me a certain way or loving me back. It's just a quality in my heart, unconditional love. It doesn't depend on anything. It's just something that I cultivate within. And so it helped me understand loving kindness practice better. So, yeah. Yes?
Yeah, maybe on that, maybe some clarity, because I loved your talk, by the way, thank you. And
That's right.
the idea that joy is a choice, and it's what I choose to focus my consciousness on, go to the whatever. But this idea of cultivating joy within myself, my first response, maybe from my conditioning, is I'm trying to feel joy. I'm trying to force it. And I would say, like, my deepest, greatest, maybe experiences of joy are when I'm not trying. Like, I was out on the middle of the channel in my kayak.
Yeah.
I meditate, and I heard a splash, and I opened my eyes, and it was a dolphin with her little baby. All of a sudden, I felt like this warmth and awe and like connectivity to them and the universe. I don't want to get too corny here, but can you help me understand? Because like when I'm sitting here, I'm trying to cultivate it, and it seems like it's not working. It seems like it's more like the joy is an effect of something else. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, first of all, and I love your example about being out and experiencing it in nature, because that's really one of the Buddha's teachings of cultivating joy that we can experience in nature, or being joyful when others experience joy. So we are finding it obviously outside of us, and it's really important that we don't consider this cultivating joy as a goal that we want to reach. But, so where it's forced, but rather where it's an invitation. Okay, tonight I'm inviting myself to cultivate joy. And maybe if cultivation sounds like too harsh for you, maybe it's just, bringing in a sense of joy, and maybe you're finding it out with the dolphins first, and then you get a sense, this is what joy feels like on the inside. So however it works for you, it's not something to be forced. If you're out on a beautiful walk, or you're out on the ocean, and you get connected automatically or more naturally, more authentically with that sense, then, your job, so to speak, is only to really take that in, to really feel the goodness of that. And that can be, and I think the way you're describing it, you're just really feeling it quite naturally. So maybe for you it doesn't even entail a cultivation. You just, yes, here it is. And this is what it feels like in my being. So.
Thank you. I think the word invitation just changes it enough for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think it takes my ego out of it.
Thanks for bringing it. Yes?
This goes back a little bit to what you were talking about, negative bias earlier. And I was just thinking, or wondering, within the teachings of Buddhism, is there like a concept of almost avoidance of things that don't bring us joy? Because I try in my personal life to avoid the things that I know bring me feelings that I don't want. Like an easy example would be, if I spend time on my phone, it does not bring me a lot of joy. So a simple tactic for me seems to be an avoidance of things that don't bring me joy. Does that make sense, or how would you kind of put that?
You said avoidance of the things that don't lead to joy. Is that, I just wanted to make sure that I heard this correctly.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's really important not to try to force anything. There's certain circumstances that will show up, obviously, where it's not going to feel pleasant. we can't always be in this place, oh, everything is joyful. I mean, as we all know, the world doesn't work that way. And sometimes it's just to bring compassion to a difficult situation, or if you have to use this device for work, or you don't have any way around it, or you need to be on the computer and it's not joyful, well, that's, the Buddha always teaches all the experiences that we can have are either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and just to bring awareness to it when something feels unpleasant, and not just to try to force it to go away. Mindfulness is really just bringing presence with a loving and caring intention. So we're not trying to judge it or to make it go away. And so the cultivation of joy can be something really intentional that you maybe practice, and it's just something that I want to offer as part of our toolbox. So sometimes it feels appropriate to cultivate joy, and other times it might just be, yeah, this feels really difficult right now, and let me see how I can be with that, how I can soothe myself, or make this feel okay in my being. So it's never about forcing anything, but just softening, being with, we want to be real too. If something feels unpleasant, it's unpleasant, and then we can just be with that. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great, wonderful. Yes,
I
hi.
have two things to say.
Yeah.
One, it really resonated with me when you talked about love and attachment. That, lots of times I confuse the two. Very easy to confuse the two. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I have two nieces that whenever they leave, I love you. Get off the phone, I love you. It's like, flip it. I don't believe it.
Oh, you don't believe when they say I love you? It feels sort of fake, in a sense. Yeah.
That's something you're supposed to say.
Something you're supposed to say, yeah.
Like a gesture.
Like a
Like a social
gesture.
gesture.
Yeah, there's a lot of conditioning. It's very cultural because, being born and raised in Germany, we don't even say I love you except for the person that, like a romantic partner, so that's very cultural, right? I mean, it's just a cultural habit, something that we're conditioned to say, and it probably is, in a way, maybe quite meaningless, maybe just something that they feel that they have to say. And so you could be a teacher to them about love and maybe have a conversation with them about it. Would be curious to find out if it means anything to them. I don't know what kind of relationship you have to them, but interesting, yeah.
I'll explore that.
Yeah. How do you feel about it when they say that?
I feel.
I mean, you're bringing it up here for a reason in connection with it.
I don't want to say it aggravates me, but it does. Because it's not, like you said, I need to cultivate what they mean by that and talk to them about it. Then it won't aggravate me. I'll get down, I'll have compassion for them and understand why they do it.
That could be helpful. And also to be aware, since this is also an ongoing class on Buddhist mindfulness, just to be aware of how it makes you feel inside, and to feel, it aggravates me, I don't like when they say it, and how does that feel in my body? And I can feel like, oh yeah, there's a sense of dis-ease here, a sense of suffering, maybe dissatisfaction, and be with that, allow that to be there. And, practice, your own example of loving kindness towards yourself, knowing that, oh, this is aggravating towards me. I need to bring some compassion here to what I'm experiencing inside. That might be helpful too. So just maybe, play with it next time they say it. Yeah, okay. Yes?
I have a question. I'm kind of going back to what Erica mentioned online. How do you invite, or what kind of mindfulness steps can you take towards forgiveness of someone that has done harm to you in the past and maybe refuses to accept it in the present, and you've invited love towards them, but they seem to be kind of like in denial
Mhm.
of the harm that they inflicted on you. Like what kinds of steps can one take to kind of accept that and be present? Sometimes it's hard to get
Right.
there.
Yeah, and so for me, it was very, very hard to forgive a certain person for many, many years, a very close family member. And I actually knew that it was not beneficial to me in those years to practice forgiveness towards them because it was just too hard. And so it's really important to just notice when you practice loving kindness towards someone, does it open your heart or do you feel a contraction in the heart? And if there's a contraction, maybe the timing is not right. You know, maybe you don't include everyone right away. Maybe you really need to start with yourself and offer yourself compassion. So again, just like over here, you know, the idea is it's an invitation, and then you can also check in. How does this feel? Do I feel closing down? Is my heart closing? Do I feel a sense of irritation or aversion, or this doesn't feel right? Then don't do it. It's probably not the right time. You know, maybe start with the people that are not so difficult to begin with before you widen the circle. And always start with yourself. I think I've said this here before. I know a Buddhist nun who was very depressed in her teenage years before she became a nun, and her teacher told her just to practice compassion and loving kindness for herself for a whole year. So maybe you need to start there first. So, yeah. Yes. Maybe one more question, because I know David is lurching in the back and telling me we are way over time. Yes.
I have a question. My son is really suffering from mental illness, and he's homeless and addicted to fentanyl, and so it's just been a really hard few weeks for me, and it almost feels selfish to try and cultivate joy in when someone that you love so much is suffering. So I just want to try and find the balance of how do I, is it selfish? You know, is that a bad thing, or
That's a very, very wonderful question, and I think the answer is that we always need to start with ourselves. We always need to be, you know, concerned with our own well-being first. So maybe it's not the word joy might not be the right word, but just to cultivate a sense of peace of heart for yourself so that you can meet what you're experiencing with your son in a more equanimous way, with a balanced heart and mind, and also knowing that there's only so much that you can do. So maybe it starts with compassion for yourself. So joy is just one of the ways that we cultivate the heart, but if that's not resonating because of the conditions of your life, then maybe it's compassion. And one of the classes is also going to be here on working with joy in difficult situations or difficult times. But if that word doesn't resonate, compassion is maybe the more appropriate response, most definitely in what you're describing. So lots of compassion for yourself too. It's very hard to see someone that you love to go through such a hard time and see suffering. So, maybe let's just take a moment and just send you a sense of compassion before we end the night, because you're describing something really difficult right now. Yeah, may we all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And may we all have peace and joy. And may your son be able to transform his suffering. Yeah. So So thank you so much for your presence this evening. Like I said, if you want to attend all 10 classes or just come every once in a while, just know that you're always welcome. And David is just coming up. And I'm sorry that I couldn't get to all the comments online, but we're already almost 15 minutes over time. So just be safe and may you be peaceful. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Hey everyone, just a few announcements.